Density will make very good density.
Oh, okay.
Proximity.
Yeah,
Proximity.
yeah.
Proximity,
Okay.
good.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. Lovely. Thank you.
How much sugar?
No, thanks. Is that ginger?
Yeah.
Wow. Very nice. So Ali, how long have you been doing this program? This radio
About 2.5 years, you know. Yeah, it's been a...
I've watched it on
Yeah.
Facebook.
No, it's,
I've seen you.
yeah, so
I
we've...
do watch it.
It's been 2 years.
About 2 years, isn't it? Just over 2 years now, so look how things have really evolved. So we were on Highfield Road first, we just moved here
okay.
to get more of a central location, so yeah.
Is it Jabs 8 with you?
Jabs B8, that's right, yeah. Jabs B8.
Jabs B8.
Yeah, so obviously the postcode's Alum Rock Rd, so...
Yeah, of course, B8.
B8, that's right, that's right. yeah, B8.
B8.
Oh, good. We'll kick things off, I think. Assalamu alaikum, good evening everyone. My name is Mr. Ali. Thank you as always for coming and tuning into the world's leading community wellbeing show on a Tuesday evening. And today is a special Tuesday evening as a lot of the Muslim community are either just about to open their fast or will be going for their first ever Taraweeh prayers. So whenever you're fasting, whether it's today or tomorrow, Ramadan Mubarak, Ramadan Kareem to all of you. I hope this blessed month is a peaceful one. It's one where we take a step back and reflect on the turbulent year that was last year, and also how important it is to reach out to those that are needy and vulnerable as well, and also for us to take some time out for our own spiritual healing as well. It's been a tough time for us individually as well, and it's it's important that you take care of yourselves as well. So walaikum salam, hope you're well. And before I introduce today's guest, that we are talking about the crime and policies for the Labour Party candidate for Simon Foster, who is contesting the West Midlands elections on the Thursday, the 6th of May. So if you've got any questions around his vision, his policies around crime and the prevention of crime, then please do get in touch. Before that, I'd like to, as always, start off by talking to you about the local Birmingham COVID dashboard, as how we are faring. Good news is that the numbers continue to decrease. So in total, we are now 306 new positive cases, which is a fall of 198 compared to the previous week. What does that mean per 100,000 population? We are now down to 26.8 per 100,000 population, a fall from 46.6, which was the week previous. So that trend is continued to go in the right trajectory. If you live, work or frequent the following wards, please continue to maintain social distancing. Please continue to wear a face mask wherever you are. So please, these are the top ranking wards for the positive cases, starting with Ward End, which has 73 positive cases, followed by Sturchley, which has 59 positive cases per 100,000 population, Gareth Green, which has 56, Kings Norton, which has 51 positive cases, Handsworth Wood, 49, Bromford and Hodge Hill, which has 46 positive cases per 100,000 population, and then Heartlands, which has 45. So these are your top 7 wards that are has the highest number of positive cases as well. So please continue to take care. So today I would like to give a warm welcome to Simon Foster, who is the candidate for the Labour Party for the up-and-coming Police Crime Commissioner. And if you're not sure about what this involves and who is the current one, then please tune in and listen, and please either phone in 0121 682 9735, or alternatively, if you prefer to put your comments or your questions on the chat, I will do my utmost best to read those out as well. So I suppose in one way, Simon, welcome home really. I know you are no stranger to Alum Rock and Watchwood Heath, having spent a good part of 10 to 12 years working for a solicitor's firm. So I suppose it's nice to be back really, is it?
Good evening, first off, and Ramadan Mubarak.
Thank you.
To all your viewers and listeners. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. And you're right.
Absolutely.
You're right. I spent 10 years working on the Alum Rock Road I came to Birmingham to work at SALT the Action Centre, the law centre at 2 Alum Rock Road. I was there for about 3.5 years, and then I spent about 7 years at Tindlewoods at 160 Alum Rock Road. So I spent 10 years as a community solicitor, providing advice and representation to the local people in relation to immigration, employment, and housing rights. And I really enjoyed my time on the Alum Rock Road. Consequently, as a result of that, I have to say the Alum Rock Road has a place very close in my heart because of that.
Yeah, it's gone strength to strength actually. It's more even thriving and busting more than usual as well. And I'm sure, you know, I remember going into Tindlewoods because they were our solicitors firm for conveyancing. And my father was a regular there and he always trusted them. So I think good in the old days, our deeds were being held by Tindlewoods. So I've got certainly a soft spot. But anyway, that's not the reason why you are here, Simon. So let's get straight into it. So you know, you are the Labour Party candidate for the Police and Crime Commissioner. What I'm going to do is allow you to sort of maybe brief everyone that aren't familiar with what is a Police and Crime Commissioner, what role and responsibility does that role have, but also your suitability and why do you think you should be the next Police and Crime Commissioner?
Okay. Well, you're right. It's probably fair to say that it's not a role that is well understood amongst the wider population. It's probably true that it's not really awfully well understood even amongst political circles either. It's a role that was introduced back in 2012. It replaced the old police committees. And in the West Midlands, we've always had Labour Police and Crime Commissioners. There's a chap called Bob Jones got elected in 2012, sadly passed away, much loved chap. And then David Johnson stood in a by-election. He was elected in 2014, and then he was elected again in 2016. But the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner is the first thing to remember is not about operational day-to-day policing, because that's the responsibility of the Chief Constable.
Absolutely.
What the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner is about making sure that you give a voice to the people. You're there to represent the people, not the police. It's about democratic accountability. It's about making sure that the police are providing an effective and efficient service to the people and communities of the West Midlands. And there are three principal functions, I would say. Firstly, to prepare a police and crime plan that sets out the needs, priorities and objectives for policing in the West Midlands on behalf of the people. Secondly, to set the council tax precept. And that's that part of your council tax that goes towards local policing. And thirdly, to hold the Chief Constable and the police service to account in the widest possible sense on behalf of the people and communities of the West Midlands. And in terms of the reasons why I'm standing, firstly, because I believe passionately in local democratic accountability. Secondly, I think it's a real opportunity to work with the police service to make sure that we deliver justice, safety and security for the people and community of the West Midlands. And thirdly, I think that I've got the professional and practical skills, knowledge and experience to hold the police service to account on behalf of the people. And I do think that in the current circumstances, there's never been a better time to care passionately about crime, policing and our criminal justice system.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very keen to sort of explore a bit more about the three key things that the Police and Crime Commissioner does. You know, you mentioned about the crime plan. You mentioned also that, you know, year on year, when I certainly see my council tax, there is a separate category which shows that, you know, beyond inflation, the council tax rise for the police is on the increase. And whether you think that's justifiable or why is that, especially with the austerity that we've seen from the central government, and is that a consequence of that? And also, do you know, in your experience now and seeing it from it and now going from it, you know, does this role actually have teeth to put to hold the police and the chief constable to account, or is it just a mere sort of talking shop?
Yeah, in terms of your council tax point, the thing to remember about that is that between 2010 and 2019, the Central Police grant from central government to the West Midlands was cut by 31%. 31%. That meant £175 million was cut was slashed from the West Midlands police budget. We lost 2,221 police officers. Community policing was dismantled. We lost hundreds of essential police staff. That was 25% of the police officers we had in the West Midlands. And the outcome of that was that council tax had to rise to make up in part for the cuts to central government grant. That's what's motivated, that's what's driven the drive, that's what's driven the rise in your local council tax. And the thing is, what the effect of that is that you, the people of the West Midlands, have ended up paying more for less local policing. So essentially, central government, I would say, the Conservative government over the past 10 years has been ripping off the people of the West Midlands as a consequence of that. And I want to campaign for reinstatement of those cuts. I want further funding to make sure that council taxpayers are not being unfairly burdened as a consequence of cuts to central government police grant. And I also want a fair funding formula. Because at the moment, there's a fundamentally unfair funding formula that operates in the West Midlands. What it means is that we end up about £40 million a year worse off than we should be. We end up with about £22 million less funding a year than Manchester. Between 2010 and 2021, the effect of that is that we've suffered in the West Midlands a 15% real terms net cut in funding. Whereas, for example, an area like Surrey, Conservative Surrey, has suffered 0.3%.
Oh, wow.
So you can see just how fundamentally unfair the funding formula is and how it disproportionately disadvantages an area like the West Midlands. I think that's completely unacceptable. Central Police grant ought to be allocated on the basis of need. And with all due respect to Surrey, I don't think the policing need that they have in Surrey is anywhere near as complex in terms of the issues that we have to deal with in the West Midlands.
No, well said. And just the last point about whether the actual role has teeth to hold the Chief Constable and the police to account.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly do have the powers to hold the Chief Constable to account. I mean, at the very end of the spectrum, in theory, you have the power to hire and fire the Chief Constable. So I don't suppose in theory it gets any more powerful than that. But not that one would be going into the intention of doing that plainly.
Not from day one.
because you it'd be my intention to make sure you have a great working relationship, because that's the way you get things done. But you do have that power. But on a day-to-day basis, you have the power to hold the Chief Constable to account and the police service to account in a whole range of different ways. And so, most certainly, you do have that power. And of course, ultimately you have that power because, of course, you've been the role is democratically elected and you're directly accountable to the people. So you are the voice of the people, and in one sense, that invests you with the power and authority to hold the police service to account on behalf of the people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we're going to go into some more about Simon's vision and his policies for a much safer and for a more secure West Midlands. And this role has, putting policies in place when we are talking about gun crime, when we're talking about gangs, when we're talking about lack of youth clubs, when we're talking about more policing on our streets. All this is under the remit, and Simon, whoever the next new police crime commissioner will be from the 6th of May, will have a real influence and a real responsibility to make sure they deliver for the people of West Midlands. So these are issues that, places like Alum Rock, Lozells, Small Heath and more suburban areas will have issues about. So this is an opportunity for you to get your points across and get your questions across. Something that if it's not in his policy, in his vision, maybe this is the time to get that raised. So Simon can certainly think about that when, if he takes office from the 7th of May. We're going to go through some of your key policies, Simon. I have been busy sort of reading those. You've already mentioned, and similar to Liam Byrne when he mentioned that 70% funding that the West Midlands gets compared to, what they should be getting, about 100%. So you already mentioned about the, we are 30%, shortfall compared to what we get in, which equates to 175 million pounds. So you, as a Labour Party PCC, as a crime commissioner, how will you ensure that we get that shortfall? What will you do in order to make sure that we get that funding come through from central government to, say, a club like Javsby 8, to an individual who's living in Lozells or in Sparkbrook?
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of the structural problems with funding, obviously that comes down to constantly using your platform to campaign with the government to point out the shortcomings in the funding structure. That's number one. Number two, obviously, you've got to make sure that you invest as wisely as possible the resources that are allocated. That's important. From my point of view, I want to rebuild community policing in the West Midlands. I think that's absolutely fundamental. Over the 10 years between 2010 and 2019, community policing in the West Midlands was dismantled. Back in 2010, we had about 1,800 community police officers, and I'm talking about police officers, not police community support officers. Police officers in community policing. By 2018, we had about 700. So we'd lost over 50% of our community police officers in that time. I think that was a big mistake. It was counterproductive, and it was a false economy. And the outcome of that was, when people say to you, "Oh, well, we never see any police officers around on the street," well, there's your answer. That's why.
Yeah.
That's why, because we suffered £175 million in cuts, and we lost 25% of our police officers in total, but we lost over 50% of the community police officers. And I think community policing is absolutely fundamental to policing in this country, because we say, don't we, in this country, that we police by consent.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that community policing should be the absolute foundation stone for policing in this country, because it provides the visible, proactive, problem-solving policing that I think people and communities want across the West Midlands.
I fully agree with you, because one of the key things that people are saying is that we used to know our Bobby, we used to be on first name terms, but now the only time we do get to see any form of police visibility is afterwards, when someone calls a 999, and then they only come in a car as well, and we need more of that. So I think there'll be a lot of support for you. So you mentioned there is you want to increase the recruitment of 2,000 police officers, and there is that sort of deficit. It's not going to be an easy task, and also trying to encourage people from a BAME community as well to make sure they're well represented takes time. So how do you sort of see us sort of hitting that target of recruiting an extra 2,000 police officers quickly as possible?
Yeah, well, we lost in between 2010 and 2018, we lost 2,221 police officers in that 8 or 9 year period. That was 25% of the police officers, and as I say, we lost many hundreds of essential police, and we lost 300 police community support officers as well.
Yeah,
never forget that. But obviously, over the next between up until 2023,
yes.
We're going to get 1,200 of those police officers back. We lost 2,221, but we're only going to get, as part of the uplift, 1,200. So we're only getting about 50% of the officers that we lost in the first place.
Sure.
So the point to remember about that is, it's welcome, but there's no levelling up when it comes to our police officers in the West Midlands. We will still be short, and so we should never lose sight of that. But of those 1,200 police officers, I want to make sure that we have 450 extra police officers in community policing. That's my pledge.
Yeah.
450 extra police officers in community policing on the streets, keeping you and your families safe.
Fantastic, thank you. And you mentioned the 450 extra police officers. I mean, that's going to come out of your budget, or how will the funding be secured for those 450?
Yeah, that'll be out of the 1,200 police officer uplift that's been operating between the 3 years of 2019-20 up until 2023-24. 22-23. So in that 3-year financial year, in the first year there were 366 additional police officers. There'll be 360 additional officers this year, and if the uplift is maintained, there'll be about 470 in year 3. So of those 1,200 police officers as part of the uplift, I would want 450 of those officers allocated to community policing.
Yeah, I don't think, fair play to you, Simon. I don't think anyone out there listening to you will actually object to and voice any kind of concern about, recruiting more police officers. That's what we definitely need. So thank you for that. Moving on to what you mentioned about sort of, the community policing. One of the key things that everyone is all about is what I just mentioned. People don't want the police coming in afterwards when someone's been stabbed or someone's been burgled. The prevention is something that we all advocate, and I think that's something key for you as well, and also that sort of community engagement. Just how important is prevention, and how realistic is that? We all know that perpetrating crime is illegal, is is going to end up in court, but still people do it. How are you going to get prevention into people's minds and make sure that we have a civic duty not to cause any kind of offence and break the law of the land?
Yeah, I mean, for me, prevention is absolutely key. It really is, because at the end of the day, the prevention of crime is always better than having to deal with the consequences of crime. So we have to always start with prevention, because plainly, response after the event, the crime's been committed, you've got a victim, you're then burdening the police, you're then burdening the criminal justice system, increased impact on public services, and all the rest of it. It's far more effective to start with prevention in the first place. And I do think that as part of that strategy around prevention, and I'll never get tired of repeating this mantra, prevention, prevention, prevention. That always has to be the starting point. And I do think that in terms of prevention, I think community policing definitely has a role to play in increasing the strategy around prevention, because the whole point about community policing is that it's proactive, not simply reactive, because you're there in the community, forming relationships, building trust and confidence, and you have the opportunity to deal with things and nip them in the bud before they become emergencies. It improves, you get better local intelligence, so you're better placed to deal with issues before they become emergencies and before they become crises. So that's absolutely key. I'm obviously determined to work with what I hope will be a Labour Metro Mayor on the 7th of May, because we want to put youth workers back in neighbourhoods. Yeah. That's a key pledge that that Liam Byrne has made, and I'm absolutely fully supportive of that, because I think it's absolutely essential. It was a huge mistake cutting youth services. We were disproportionately disadvantaged in the West Midlands. We've had about 80% of cuts to youth services in the West Midlands. I think that was disastrous, and I think we've been paying the price as a consequence. I think we need to deal with school exclusions, because that's very important in terms of prevention, improving statutory safeguarding, and fundamentally investing in our violence reduction unit, because the whole philosophy around the violence reduction unit is about ensuring prevention, early intervention, and addressing the underlying causes of crime. And in order to do that, obviously, we do need a joined-up team approach as well. We've all got to work together in relation to this, because at the end of the day, issues like knife and gun crime, which you referred to before, the police can't solve that on their own. No. They can do a fabulous job dealing with the symptoms, but they can't solve the problem on their own. They can't arrest their way out of this problem. We need everybody working together, and I mean, that means it means our health service, it means education, it means housing, it means our youth services, it means our social workers, it means our local authorities, it means our elected representatives. We've all got to work together to solve this problem, and if we do, I do believe that we can prevent violent crime, we can protect our young people, and most importantly of all, we can save lives.
Most definitely. I'm just going to touch on the point about the prevention. I agree with you. You know, we have to, do a lot of work in schools as well, get that message out there quite early. Primary schools as well. You know, we're not talking about secondary schools now.
Yeah.
You know, children as young as 7, 8, 9 now, you know, if they aren't, taught about the intervention, about the responsibility, and build that trust with the police and the wider community, then you've got should we say, the nefarious sort of individuals that may be grooming people, especially some of the county lines. You've heard people that are, as young as 12, 13, because they think that the police won't stop these individuals grooming to be the county line supplier as well. I also want to talk about, the youth clubs as well, the fact that there isn't anywhere for people to sort of go and spend their time, and if unfortunately we have also seen that when individuals are sort of going into open sort of fighting on the streets, where we've seen 1 or 2 incidents over the last week, people then obviously now with social media, they sort of send that viral, and people think there's a brazen fight now going on in the early evening and there's no police. They think they can get away with it, and we want to send a strong message out there that no, these guys will be caught, and you can't break the law with impunity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, this comes back to community policing, and it comes back to prevention, and it comes back to investing in youth services. So important. The example that you set in this community in relation to Jabs B8 and your football club and the youth work you do is absolutely exemplary. That sort of thing makes such a big difference in local communities. It really does, in terms of engaging young people because at the end of the day, you have to give young people a positive alternative. If you give young people a positive alternative, let's face it, the vast majority of them want that, and they will take that road, but it's about making sure that they have the opportunities, because if they don't have those opportunities and we don't invest the resources in our young people, then ultimately, we risk paying the price.
Yeah, and you know what? Children and young people are generally maligned. I used to be a science teacher as well back in the day, when I had a bit of sanity. And you know what? 99.9% of young people that I've come across are beautiful, wonderful people.
Yeah.
They just make the wrong choices, bad choices. They get maybe influenced by others, maybe peer pressured into doing stuff that they wouldn't normally do. Unfortunately, because, the parents may have been split, or they're spending all their time working and making ends meet. There's no one at home. All these are multifactorial. Poverty, again, that's another thing as well. All these are multifactorial reasons as to why, places like Alum Rock, Washwood Heath, other areas are, having more incidents of, gun crime. There was some data out for 2 weeks ago which showed the areas with the highest number of gun crime over the last 3 years. Alum Rock, Washwood Heath was number 1, followed by Los Elves. And in one way, I wasn't surprised, but at the same time, I was very sad that, these are people that have now either died or have been seriously affected as a result of that sort of gunshot wound. And it's, and that's why we try to sort of, have these positive, academies like Jabs B8 and BYSA, Anwar Katak has sent you a message as well saying, good luck, Simon, top man for the job from me and the entire BYSA team. So obviously there's a lot of support for you there. But we've got not too far from here. I don't know whether you're familiar at the bottom of the Warden Park. There's a place called the Base. And there's another one in Border Green now. There's a lot of these fantastic community assets that this has been closed now for 14 years. Where do you want young people to go when fantastic assets like that are closed? There's nowhere for young people to go, and that's something that I would certainly encourage you from my own personal capacity, is regenerate some of those community assets and give it to, if the council haven't got the money, you haven't got the money, give it to organisations on the ground for them to run it on their own, and they are willing to. It's just the bureaucracy and the red tape of it all makes it so difficult.
Yeah, of course, it's always a challenge. From my personal point of view, it's very important to me that children and young people will always be a priority for me. It's absolutely important that we safeguard the welfare of our children and young people, and we've got to make sure that children and young people are a top priority in all actions and decisions that affect them. It's absolutely key, and we know, don't we, that often the reason that children, young people get into it's often because sometimes they will come from a background that involves domestic abuse, sometimes they will have mental health issues, sometimes they have care experience, and all the rest of it, and they've been exposed to some serious adverse childhood experiences from a young age, and often they're often having to cope with those issues, and often as a result of that they're at greater risk of vulnerability in terms of getting involved in county lines, violent youth crime, and so on. But I mean, what I would say is absolutely key that we make sure that we invest in our young children. It's absolutely essential. Because, as you said, we know that the vast majority of children and young people out there are talented, wonderful, really capable people with huge potential, and we've got to use that potential. It's a waste if we don't use that potential, and if we invest in our young people, we will ultimately get the benefit of it. And we know, particularly vulnerable young people, they need that help and support, perhaps more than somebody who comes from a rather more privileged background. We've got to make sure that those young children don't fall through the net. Absolutely key, because if we manage to do that, we all win.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. I'm just going to move the conversation on to the community engagement. As you know, when you had the Bobby and the me, you were on first name terms. I have seen that now. When police, when there's any interaction, I've seen one or two incidents where, as stop and search, or people may ask, where are you going? And I've seen that sometimes that may be the only engagement that people have with the police. And sometimes just the tone and the engagement, if it's far more respectful, you'll see a lot more cooperation. But, if I come to you with already an aggressive and a very maybe a hierarchical sort of tone, because obviously I've got the uniform on, thinking I've got all these powers, you're already, upsetting that young person, and he may react as he not normally would. But, a bit of politeness, you may get, what you need without, any kind of aggro. And secondly, you leave a good impression on that person, and he'll tell other people that, the police are the ones that we can trust with. They are the ones that we call when we are in distress and when we call. But just one or two examples, it's not many, but it just, gives the whole police a bad sort of name, and people think, they're racist, or, they can't be trusted, we don't want to be doing it, and all of a sudden, gives everyone sort of a bad footing. So how important is it, when police do turn up to an incident, just to sort of, go there with a calm and a professional attitude and treat everyone with a bit of respect?
I think that's absolutely fundamental. As in any walk of life, frankly, if you treat people courteously, lawfully, fairly and respectfully, you will normally have that reciprocated. Absolutely. Equally, as you say, if you approach anyone in any walk of life, doesn't matter whether it's policing, doesn't matter, whatever the walk of life is, if you approach somebody with a poor attitude, if you exhibit arrogance or poor attitude, I'm afraid it tends to be reciprocated as well. Absolutely. As a general rule. And so I think it's absolutely important that you always maintain your professionalism. You treat people lawfully, fairly, and respectfully and courteously. I think that's so important.
Absolutely. So for those of you who are just joining in, we've spent the first half an hour of the show just introducing Simon, who's the Labour Party candidate for the up-and-coming Police Crime Commissioner elections that are taking place on Thursday, the 6th of May. He is setting out his stall as to why you should trust him with your vote. If you've got any questions, or if you want to just, put your comment across, the number is 0121 682 9735. So please do get in touch. Some of the comments, Walaikum Salam. I hope everyone is well. This is from Councillor Babar Baz, actually, from the Live Dem. With the failure of his predecessors, knife gun and drug crime has spiraled out of control. What makes him think he will do anything different to tackle this?
Well, because I, first off, want to rebuild community policing in the West Midlands, yep. And I do think that will make a big difference. We've touched on it before, but I think, in terms of ensuring that we can have proactive, visible, responsive policing, that will make a big difference in terms of the way we communicate within communities, and that will go some considerable way to addressing some of those issues for sure.
Yeah, no, thank you. Abdul Ali said, hi, Simon, GLM meeting. So I don't know whether he means the Green Lane Masjid meeting. I don't know whether that means anything to you. Maybe, Abdul, if you want to just maybe give us a bit more detail as to what you're trying to get across. I've already read out Anwar Katak's message about good luck, Simon, top man for the job, from me and the entire BYSA team. Muhtarim Shah, good luck, Simon. And he's followed up by saying, education is a key, especially at an early age. Absolutely, we both advocate that. Javed Akhtar, salam, walaikum salam to both of us. Muhtarim, you get them off the streets and do hobbies like football, boxing, martial arts. Absolutely. And I think that's very key in terms of, channeling the energy in a positive way and giving them, other stuff to be doing. Certainly. Simon is a good, strong candidate for the job. Good luck. All the best. Okay, there's something here. What has the present incumbent police and crime commissioner achieved? I don't think Simon here as a mouthpiece for the current police, but if you want to ask Simon about his policies, then he'll be here to answer that rather than what the current commissioner is doing. I hope that's okay. Gun and knife crime has exploded under his watch. We don't. Okay. I'm just going to move on. Okay. Chaudhry Shabraz Ahmed Balathi. As someone who coaches with Juniors Academy of Birmingham Sports, B8FC, I understand the importance of keeping the youth engaged in activities to nourish both their mental health and physical health. What provision is there currently for young people in Birmingham and the wider West Midlands? And if elected, what does Simon promise to bring in for the young people of Birmingham? I think we sort of slightly touched on that, but if you think that you want to add anything, please by all means do so.
Yeah, well, I would just reiterate. It's about making sure that children and people are an absolute priority for me. That is, that's a core pledge from my point of view. We've got to make sure we safeguard the welfare of children and people, and we make sure that young people are a top priority in all actions and decisions that affect them. If we invest in children, we will get the benefit, and particularly vulnerable young children. As I say, it's absolutely key. We need to make sure that we prevent our children and young people from becoming victims of crime, criminal exploitation, or becoming offenders.
Yeah, absolutely. So also one of the key things that people are really afraid of are violent crime, when you see people sort of, bursting into your homes and, whether they're after your car keys or whether they're after some of your valuables inside, or just people on the street, unprovoked attacks or gang attacks, and really sends a real shiver up and down people, especially when you've got children or elderly people with you as well. And we want to sort of make sure that, again, there are real consequences. Anyone that wants to think that they can take, a hammer or a gun, a knife, to anyone must know that the heavy arm of the law will come down on them, and make sure that the police and yourself take those sort of things seriously. And of course, we know prevention is better, but for those that still, are hardened criminals, what sort of confidence can you give to the community that you and the police are not going to tolerate any kind of lax and, a soft attitude towards them?
Yeah, we need robust, tough policing to deal with hardened criminals. Of course we do. Those people who are hell-bent on making other people's lives a misery, we need tough, robust policing. There can't be any compromise in connection with that. Absolutely. Yeah,
no, absolutely. There's a violent reduction unit there, and I know there's we have sort of people that have turned to crime as a means of a career, and we have to sort of obviously still have hope that through education and through positive messaging that they may sort of become remorseful and reflect on what they've done. But some of these hardened criminals need to know that the police aren't going to compromise anyway on their approach, and to make sure not only their behavior and their acts are prevented, are stopped, but also their benefit, their proceeds of their criminal activity is taken away from them. I know we've got the police POCA, Police of Crime Proceeds Act. How important is that to you? For example, if I've benefited so much from my crime, to take what I've built up away from me and hurt me where it really means something to me.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. One of the real serious shortcomings and and this is just but one of them that I touch upon, but one of the really serious shortcomings in terms of Conservative Party strategy over the past 10 years is that far from cracking down on ruthless drug producers, suppliers and dealers, they've often facilitated them. And for example, they've underfunded the resources devoted to proceeds of crime, seizure of proceeds of crime, because that's one very good way of making sure that you take away the ill-gotten gains from those individuals who've partaken in serious acts of criminality. And of course, you can reinvest that money, for example, in the context of drugs, into drug addiction services in order to start to help provide drug addiction services so that we're not only disrupting supply, we're disrupting the demand, and we break that cycle of crime, and we drag those criminal drug markets away from those ruthless producers, suppliers and dealers. And that's one very good way of doing it, using proceeds of crime. But as I say, unfortunately, that has been seriously underfunded in recent years. And I don't think we make as much of that opportunity as we perhaps could.
It's just something that comes to me now. I know an area like Alum Rock, if there's any, I don't know whether it's in your powers or you'll be able to look at it if you were to be elected after the 6th of May. If, for example, there's, £1,000 that you've taken out of, for example, the Proceeds of Crime Act, that should, in essence, really, 80-90% of that should be reinvested in services here, but at the moment it's not. It's equally spread, or whatever the policy may be. Is there anything that you can look at, or is there anything you can promise about, maybe redistribution in the areas where you've actually managed to get it from?
Yeah, I mean, I think the rules around the way those resources are allocated ultimately, I forget the absolute detail, but by my vague recollection, I stand to be corrected, but I think possibly only about 20% of the proceeds of crime that are recovered actually come back to the area in which the policing was done, and some of it gets allocated to central government, some of it goes to the court service, some of it goes to elsewhere in the criminal, Crown Prosecution Service and so on. So it kind of gets divvied up. But you're absolutely right. I do think there's a compelling case to for those proceeds of crime, and in particular for them to be reinvested in the areas that perhaps are suffering the greatest level of drug crime, for example. I do think there's a compelling and arguable case for that.
Absolutely.
And certainly, that would be a case that I would want to make with central government.
I think if that was the case, Simon, we would have a youth club, we would have a sports club, we would have a boxing club, every corner in Alum Rock, I think. So I think I can say that, being from Alum Rock. But anyway, one of the things that someone else has come back with is that the sentences passed by the courts do not fit the crime committed. What changes is Simon proposing so the harsher sentencing? I don't know. I don't think that's under his remit, but I'll certainly pass the question on to you about harsher sentences.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, plainly sentencing is not something that is within the remit of the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Yeah.
That ultimately is a matter for central government to set the minimum and maximum sentences for particular crimes. It's also for guidance by the Sentencing Guidance Council in terms of how that's interpreted. And of course, ultimately, it's for the courts to determine what is the appropriate sentence in any given case. But yes, there's always a case for keeping these things under constant review, and I don't think anybody would always say we get everything right in relation to that, and there may well be instances where sentencing tariffs ought to be adjusted accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points that are being put onto your chat. But again, if you want to speak to Simon directly, the number is 0121 682 9735. We've got so many things happening. I think I'm going to sort of see it through now till the hour end. We normally give the guest a break, but Simon, we're going to go straight through now, so if that's okay. Moving on to domestic abuse now. I know lockdown has been awfully difficult on families, with the income being disseminated completely. People have been on furlough. People are stuck at home now. The children at home. It's been a real sort of, a hot pot of, people sort of spending too much time where they're not used to each other. Not that it's any kind of excuse whatsoever, but the rate of domestic abuse and violence has gone up, not just on men versus women, but women versus men as well. But by and large, 89% it is on women. And that's something that you are very passionate about to tackle. what are your sort of key policies for women out there or people out there that may have suffered from domestic abuse or maybe suffering in silence? What are your proposals to give them a bit of confidence?
Yeah, you're right. This is a matter about which I feel very strongly. We really do need to make sure that we combat violence against women and girls and domestic abuse. My police and crime plan will ensure that that's an absolute priority. I think number one, we need to make sure that the police are using all the powers available to them to make sure that women are safe from violence and domestic abuse, and that means making sure we impose bail conditions whenever possible. We make sure that we arrest for breach of non-molestation orders, we use domestic violence protection notices and orders, and we impose restraining orders whenever appropriate. That's absolutely key for me. I want to extend the network of independent domestic violence advocates, because I think they provide victims and survivors of domestic abuse with key help and support in that area in order to assist them navigate the system, because quite often it's intimidating to have to do that, and they need that level of support and that advocacy on their behalf quite often. And thirdly, I think it's absolutely important that we make sure we have the right help and support in terms of victim services, the right place at the right time. So we make sure that victims and survivors of violence against women and girls, domestic abuse, are supported in the right way and tailored packages to make sure people get what they need in terms of help and support. That's absolutely key.
Absolutely. I can see the passion in your voice, really. As soon as we've sort of touched on this, that you've really sort of, taken to heart. This is one thing that you really want to try to tackle. However, if you look at the overall conviction rates, not only are women less likely to have these things reported, but the conviction rate is also quite low. So that then sort of sends a message to some women that are suffering that, it's not worth their while reporting it or saying anything and just to suffer in silence. But also, the other thing that I was going to mention was how important it is, because the relationship is always unfair economically as well. Where maybe the man may be earning, or he may be, having the access to the bank account. And how important is it for women to also have a safe house or somewhere they can feel that they will be supported financially, not only for themselves, but also for their young children as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, that's absolutely fundamental, because we know that one of the most dangerous times in any abusive relationship is when that particular individual decides they want to leave that relationship. That's always a very dangerous time. We know that. One of the things I would say is that we do have a domestic abuse bill that is going through Parliament at the moment. I do think, that's been described as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to really make a real difference in terms of domestic abuse and violence against women and girls. And I do think that can make a big difference. We're going to have a statutory definition of domestic abuse now, and as you quite rightly said, that's not just violence and sexual violence. It will involve economic abuse, coercive control, and so on. It's a wide definition. We're going to have a domestic abuse commissioner now, who is going to effectively be provide a campaigning platform and voice for victims and survivors. We're also going to have, hopefully, proper funding. Well, there's going to be a statutory duty imposed on local authorities to make sure that they provide proper services for women who are victims of domestic abuse. And I sincerely hope that is going to be funded adequately. So that's translated into making sure that we have a properly funded network of refuges, so that women in those circumstances, or any victims of domestic abuse, of course, have an opportunity to be able to extricate themselves from once they make that breakthrough. You're absolutely right. We know that domestic abuse is vastly underreported, and we know that it's phenomenally difficult to leave an abusive relationship. We know that as well. And we just close on saying, the tragic murder of Sarah Everard, I think, has served notice on all of us to redouble our efforts when it comes to combating violence against women and girls and domestic abuse. And it's so important we don't lose this opportunity to address these things, because they're very, very important and they need serious attention.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think someone's just women safety. What are Simon's policies and proposal to protect them on our street? So Sarah Everard's case really. So this is specifically more for people not in a domestic setting, more on the street really, or in a in a public transport.
Yeah, I mean, I think one example of that would be to make sure that we could make street harassment a crime, because it's not in and of itself a crime at the moment. That's number one. I've always been a supporter of making sure that we make misogyny a hate crime, for example. I mean, that's a campaign that was run by Citizens UK, and Stella Creasy's run it. We want to make sure, well, number one, that police forces start recording it as a hate crime indicator. West Midlands Police don't at the moment. About 7 or 8 police forces around the country do. I've always pledged that if I got elected, we would make sure that West Midlands Police start to record hate crime as misogyny as a hate crime indicator. In actual fact, the government has conceded that in the domestic abuse bill, so it will actually become law to record misogyny as a hate crime indicator from now on, because they conceded an amendment. But in addition to that, the Law Commission is actually looking at a whole review around hate crime, and of course hate crime isn't just about misogyny, it deals with lots of other protected characteristics as well. But there's a review going on in relation to that, and I do think it's highly likely that from that will come some legislation which will ensure that misogyny will become a substantive hate crime, along with disability, race, religion, sexual orientation, transgender status, and possibly some of the other protect characteristics as well.
Thank you very much for that. Moving on now, we're sort of getting towards the end of the show, and we haven't even touched on one of the big ticket items really for places like Alum Rock, where it's drugs. And we're talking about sort of hard drugs, like cocaine, heroin, cannabis. I know alcohol's part of it. So, addictive substances, really, illegal substances. And as you know, a lot of crime that's perpetrated, whether it's dealing, whether it's burglary, whether it's, other stuff, it's all centered around drugs, especially if we can just sort of maybe focus on that. And people want to know, is this a battle that we have lost, and we want to just more or less sort of, have that muttered now that, it's, we're only touching the surface? Or do you think that with your energy and with your verve that you'll be able to come in and put that back on the agenda and go hard against and have almost like a zero tolerance to drugs? Or will you think that maybe we should go to the dealers, but not maybe the ones that are sort of doing it on a street level or consuming it? What are your thoughts on drugs?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. We should never lose sight of the fact of the real serious impact that that drugs have in communities up and down the West Midlands. I mean, I've travelled a lot around the West Midlands, in the last year or two, and I assure you, one of the key issues one of the issues that quite often mention is speeding, up and down residential roads. That would be one. But one of the others that people will invariably mention is just the prevalence. And the way in which drug dealing and drug taking is evident across the West Midlands in various communities around the West Midlands. It really is noticeable, and people remark upon it all the time. That's number one. So, and in terms of the impact that drugs have in the West Midlands, it's estimated, isn't it, that about half of all acquisitive crime, so burglary, shoplifting, robbery and theft, half of that acquisitive crime is driven by those who are engaging in that acquisitive crime to fund a drug or alcohol habit, addiction. So that's important to understand that, that's kind of the kind of impact that it has. And we know as well, of course, that about one person every 3 days in the West Midlands dies as a result of drug poisoning, and it costs the West Midlands about 1.4 billion, at least 1.4 billion pounds. In terms of the national country, it costs the country about 20 billion pounds, it's estimated, in terms of the impact of the illicit drugs industry in this country. So what I would say is, firstly, yes, of course we need robust, tough policing, particularly when it comes to having to deal with those ruthless drug producers, suppliers and dealers who are hell-bent on making other people's lives a misery and preying on the vulnerable at the end of the day. That's absolutely important. But I mean, equally, we need to invest in drug addiction services, because we need to be disrupting demand for drugs as well as the supply. That's absolutely key, and unfortunately this government has taken its eye off the ball in relation to that. A lot of those drug addiction services were being cut in the last 10 years. I mean, that was a big mistake in my view. Thirdly, we need to make sure that we divert those people who are suffering with chronic addiction away from the criminal justice system towards harm prevention and treatment. That is so important, because often many of those people are vulnerable, and they're as much victims as anyone, because they're suffering with serious addiction issues. And of course, yes, I mean, you can put them through the criminal justice system, but we know that unless you treat those addiction problems, they get trapped in that perennial revolving door, and they go into prison for a few months or whatever, and they come out, and of course they, if you haven't treated the addiction, they just engage in the same cycle of crime. You've got to break that cycle of crime, and you've got to really take the drug markets away from those ruthless suppliers, dealers and producers. That's absolutely key. And the other thing I would say is we need to also make sure that we're, as I mentioned earlier, making the most of proceeds of crime, making sure we're seizing the proceeds of crime. So, because at the end of the day, those people who are engaging in that, those producers, dealers and suppliers, it's a business from their point of view. So you need to take away the profits that they have made from that business and invest them into something really useful. For example, drug addiction services. So that, as I say, we can break that cycle of crime and drag those drug markets away from those producers, suppliers and dealers. And the other thing I would say is we really need to focus as well on criminal exploitation in this process, because criminal exploitation in terms of county lines is a huge, well, I suspect we may only know the tip of the iceberg in relation to this. I mean, I know Dame Carol Black's report estimated that there were 27,000 vulnerable children and young people wrapped up in county lines. And it's not just children and young people, it's often vulnerable adults as well. And there's a lot of violence attached to all of this as well. And that's another reason, if we've got a strategy around violence, those two issues are interconnected as well. So we've got to see it all as one complete package. It's an absolute priority that we need to be able to tackle those issues. But I mean, that would be my broad strategy for dealing with those matters.
So, Simon, we're sort of coming towards the end now. I'm just going to give you 2 or 3 sort of last questions, just quick fire questions, really, if I can. So please get yours in before, being the host, I have certain privileges I'm going to take advantage. So, one of the key things about, grassroots organisation, I won't mention mine, but say, for example, there's a fantastic group called Arctive that uses art to engage young people. And there's just 2 or 3 young girls that have come together and doing some fantastic work. They're not very well known, they don't have the resources, but they're not on your radar, at that sort of high level. And, when it comes to engagement, when it comes to resources, that sort of, they get ignored. And I suppose the challenge is for you to go beneath the sort of the more that are sort of structured, the ones that are good at marketing, the ones that, got the buzzwords and, they're nice to sort of, for you to be seen with. But how important it is that you go to, communities like Alum Rock beneath the service and know and work with these sort of organisations as well. How important is that to you?
Well, that is important to me. I've always said, as part of this campaign, I wanted to be a people and communities police and crime commissioner. And what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is that, it's not a police and crime commissioner who sits behind a desk in Lloyd House. It needs to be a police and crime commissioner who is engaging with, listening to and working with the people and community of the West Midlands. And from my point of view, that will be absolutely key and forefront in terms of the role as I see it and as I would want to frame it and mould it as Police and Crime Commissioner. In terms of recognising those projects that perhaps aren't as high profile, as well resourced, that I do think that's a challenge. That's a challenge because there's so much potential there amongst those young people, and we mustn't lose sight of that, because there's a lot of energy an ability and potential within those young people, and we need to make the most of it in the West. I mean, we know that in the West Midlands, don't we? I mean, it's the youngest,
Absolutely,
one of the youngest area in the whole of Europe, and all the rest of it. And I mean, I think it was Keir Starmer who said, we want this country to be, the best place to grow up in and the best place to grow old in. Well, I mean, I would add something to that. We need to make sure that the West Midlands is the best place for young people to be in. As far as I'm concerned, that's my commitment. We need to make sure that the West Midlands, and I don't think, because we are the youngest place in the West Midlands, I don't think our children and young people would expect anything less of us. We need to make sure that we rise to that challenge.
Absolutely. If you were to win on the 6th of May, it's all about diversity, inclusivity now. We're just conscious now that a lot of high-level management, senior leadership teams aren't representative of the demographics of Birmingham and the wider West Midlands. What assurance can you give to the listeners and viewers of Radio RP Awaaz that your team, your senior team, are going to be representative, where there's going to be women, people from the Pakistani community, from the black community, and make sure they were represented?
Yeah, well, first off, in terms of West Midlands Police itself, it's absolutely important. I mean, I mentioned before that we say we police by consent. Well, of course, if we police by consent, we need a police service that is representative of the communities it polices. And this is an issue that's been going on for far too long. I mean, we can date this back, we can date it back decades. I mean, we can go back to Scarman, we can go back to Macpherson, we can go back to the Home Affairs Select Committee report back in 2016 that said progress in terms of ensuring that we have a representative police service is appallingly woeful, frankly. We need to sort it. And I mean, I'm fully behind David Jameson's pledge in relation to us making sure that of the 2,800 police officers we have to recruit by 2023 in order to get the net uplift of 1,200, we make sure that 1,000 of those 2,800 are from black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. That's a pledge that David Jameson's made, and it's a pledge that I fully support and that I would want to see through, because I do think it's absolutely important. I always say that we're living in the West Midlands in 2021. It's not 1921. We really need to get with the programme in that sense. That's absolutely key. Now, having said that, just to move on to your direct point, I don't think I can have any credibility making those points to the Chief Constable and to West Midlands Police unless I am leading by example. So, plainly from my point of view, I've always said I want my team, I want the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner, I want my team to be representative of the communities of the West Midlands, and that will be very important to me. Absolutely.
Two final questions, Simon, and then we'll call it a wrap. The first one is, just want to get your views on stop and search. Do you still think there's a place for it? As we know that the black people are 9 times more likely to be stopped compared to a white person. What's your general views about stop and search?
Yeah, well, I mean, stop and search has a place in policing. Plainly, it can be an effective tool, for example, to get dangerous weapons off the street. But having said that, we always need to make sure that it's conducted lawfully and transparently and accountably, and we make sure that that all those provisions are complied with, and we need to make sure that it's subjected to proper scrutiny, whether that's by way of community scrutiny panels, whether it's by way of the Strategic Police and Crime Board, whether we make sure that police officers are using body-worn video cameras so that there's proper accountability. So all of those issues need to be dealt with. So yes, it's an essential tool for policing. It can be effective if it's used properly, but if it's misused, it can seriously undermine trust and confidence, particularly within black, Asian, minority ethnic communities. And we have to face up to that, and we have to deal with it, and we have to make sure that it's a very powerful tool in the part of the police. So there's a kind of legal principle. I'm putting my my lawyer's hat on here. It's a very powerful tool, and there's a general principle in law that the more powerful, the more effective, the more powerful the power, the more you have to subject it to scrutiny and accountability. there has to be a balance.
Absolutely.
That's the key point. There has to be a balance.
Absolutely. Final point is I'm from a Muslim background, and we know that at the moment, Islamophobia is on the rise. 50% of all hate crimes is targeted towards people of a Islamic or a Muslim faith. I think Metropolitan have got a special crime about Islamophobia, but I think here within West Midlands, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's more considered as a hate crime. What are your thoughts about maybe making, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia a specific crime against, that faith rather than just deeming it as a hate crime?
Yeah, in terms of in terms of statute, it may well be that that's something that the Law Commission is currently looking at in terms of its review on hate crime at the moment. I mentioned that earlier. From my point of view, hate crime has to be taken incredibly seriously in the West Midlands, as it does elsewhere in the country.
Yeah.
I will always make sure that hate crime is dealt with seriously. Number one, we need to make sure we facilitate and encourage the reporting of hate crime, because of course people don't always feel able to report it, and we need to make sure that we do so, whether that's direct to the police or via third-party reporting centres. And I do think third-party reporting centres have got a really key role here, because quite often people have all sorts of reasons why they're intimidated why they don't report hate crime. And I think having the support of third-party reporting centres does give people the confidence to be able to do that. That's important. We need to make sure the police record hate crime properly. We need to make sure they investigate it properly, and they treat it with the seriousness with which it demands. And we need to make sure that the perpetrators of hate crime are held to account via the criminal justice system. Because if you're a victim of hate crime, it can have really devastating consequences for you. Nobody should be subjected to a hate crime just because of who they are. Not in the West Midlands, and it won't be something that I will tolerate as West Midlands Police Crime. And I would just say, finally, we do need to make sure as well we have proper victim services as well, so that those people who are victims of hate crime get the support and help that they need.
That was Simon's vision and his policies around when he becomes and if he becomes elected on the Thursday the 6th of May. So please, he's set his stalls out. If you've got any further questions, continue to pour in. We will forward them on to Simon over the next few days and weeks. As always, Simon, I normally give my guest a last 30 seconds, a minute, just to sort of bring everything together and give one more final concluding remarks as to why on Thursday, the 6th of May, the fantastic people of West Midlands should vote for you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. It's been a pleasure coming along, and so I just want to thank you, and I want to thank all of your listeners for taking the time to listen. That's fantastic. But what I would just say is, I've always said I want to be a People and Communities Commissioner, and that means a commissioner who engages with, listens to, and works with communities. I think we need a Labour Police and Crime Commissioner who is going to hold this current government to account, not only for the past 10 years in terms of what they've imposed on our West Midlands Police Service, but also on the communities that they serve. And number two, I think we need a Labour Police and Crime Commissioner who appreciates that the police service is a public service, available to all, committed above all else to community policing, and that's why I've pledged an extra 450 community police officers out on the streets protecting you and your family. We need a Police and Crime Commissioner who understands the role of prevention. Prevention, dealing with early intervention and addressing the underlying causes of crime, because the prevention of crime is always better than having to deal with the consequences of crime. And yes, of course, we need robust, tough policing to deal with those hardened criminals who are hell-bent on making people's lives a misery. And we need a Labour Police and Crime Commissioner who understands equality, social justice and the rule of law. And we need to make sure that that's about justice, safety and security for all of our people and communities in the West Midlands.
That was Simon Foster pouring his stall out as to why you should vote for him on Thursday, 6th of May. I hope you found the programme useful. Certainly I did as well. So please, if you can, whoever you vote for, please at least turn up on Thursday. This is something that people have sacrificed their lives. They've given an awful lot of sacrifices for us to have that right. On that note, as always, please continue to look after yourselves and each other. I know for me, I'm going to go to the mosque now to do my first Tarawih. Ramadan Mubarak from me. I hope it's a good month for everyone. I will be continuing my show throughout this month, but my hour will be going back. So 7 to 8 from next week as well. I hope you will continue to support me and be with me throughout this holy month. Until next week, please look after yourselves and each other. God bless.
सर आपने के लिए नंबर नोट किए 01